Hey guys, how's it going? This is Watch, and in this video we're doing a three-way comparison between the iPad Air 2, the Samsung Tab S, and the Microsoft Surface 3. These are what I consider the top tablets that are out right now, so if you're interested in any one of these tablets, this is a perfect comparison for you. So without any further ado, let's get right into the comparison and see which tablet comes on top. Now, the first thing that we're going to talk about is the overall design and form factor of all three of these tablets. Now, looking at the dimensions itself, you can see that the largest tablet is certainly the Microsoft Surface 3. It's certainly the widest and tallest thanks to its larger 12-inch screen, measuring about 292 millimeters in terms of its height, 201 millimeters in terms of its width. Now, the Air 2 and the Tab S are fairly similar in terms of their overall dimensions. The Air 2 is about 240 millimeters in terms of its height and 169.5 millimeters in terms of its width, versus the Tab S, which is 247.3 millimeters in terms of its height and 177.3 millimeters in terms of its width. Now, in terms of thickness, you can see that the Air 2 is extremely thin, measuring only about 6.1 millimeters. Now, the Tab S isn't far behind at 6.6, and certainly the Surface 3 is certainly the thickest at 9.1 millimeters. Furthermore, in terms of weight, the iPad Air 2 is certainly lighter, measuring only a mere 437 grams versus the Tab S's 467, and the Surface 3 is certainly the heaviest of all of them, almost by a factor of 2, measuring 800 grams. Now, in terms of ergonomics and build quality, I do have to say that all three of these tablets are built quite well. Now, certainly one thing is true, that the Surface 3 and the iPad Air are kind of tied in terms of their build quality and construction. They both feel like they're made out of solid metal parts, which they are, and they kind of feel a little bit more premium than the Samsung Tab S. Now, that's not saying that the Tab S isn't built well. It certainly is. It's made out of high quality polycarbonate plastics. Now, in the hand, they all feel a little bit different. Obviously, the iPad 2 is kind of the most comfortable in terms of ease of use, and the Samsung Tab S is certainly just as comfortable. Based on the home button configuration, it's certainly designed to be more of a landscape based tablet, versus the iPad 2 is kind of designed to be more of a portrait style. But although in all these tablets you can switch orientation on the fly, no problem, and they're all formatted to suit in any orientation, so not really any limitation in any three of these tablets. And one thing is certainly apparent, that the Surface 3 is certainly more of a full-on computer. It's using desktop and laptop based hardware and architecture, and since it's running a full version of Windows 8.1, it's certainly great for anybody that wants to replace their main computer with the Surface 3. Now, that being said, the iPad Air 2 and the Tab S are certainly fully capable machines themselves. You can get keyboard attachments with them, and even use a couple of different aftermarket stylus to do a lot of the things you can do on a Surface 3. But that being said, again, the Surface 3 is certainly the highest end and most powerful tablet that we have on display right now. Now, moving forward, we're going to talk about the main thing on a tablet, and that's certainly the screen. Now, the Microsoft Surface 3 has a 12-inch display. Now, you can get the Samsung Note lineup of tablets that has a similar display configuration, but I chose the new Tab S because it has one of the highest resolution displays in the market right now, with a very impressive 2560 by 1600, and it's a 10.5-inch display that has a PPI count of 288, making that display the best in any tablet right now. Now, the Surface 3 has a 2560 by 1440 fully IPS LED backlit display, and that has a PPI about 216. And our new iPad Air 2 has a very similar screen from last year's iPad Air, measuring with a Retina display of 2048 by 1536 with a PPI count of about 264. Now, it has a new laminated display which uses a process that brings the LED backlight, the LCD panel, and the capacitive touchscreen itself, that whole assembly, a lot closer together, so the glass itself is right up against the screen, making you kind of direct and more closer contact to the actual screen itself. And it's a similar kind of process and technology that they use on making the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, so you get a very nice vibrant display that also is better in terms of multiple viewing angles and overall clarity. Now, in terms of the color accuracy and overall kind of impression that you have in viewing all three of these screens, I think they offer something unique in each model. The Surface 3, because of its large 12-inch screen, has a very kind of immersive feel that makes you want to do work and really use the tablet as much as possible. It's a very pleasurable experience, just browsing the web and using the different apps, and even watching videos is a entertaining experience because of that larger display. Now, the iPad certainly has excellent color rendition. It's famous for having pretty solid colors that doesn't oversaturate and kind of makes things look a little bit more realistic. And that's certainly kind of a fault of what the Tab S can certainly do because of its organic LED technology. But you can modify all three of these displays to kind of suit your viewing style and your viewing needs. Now, if you were to ask me which screen I prefer the most, I would have to say that they're all pretty close, but if I had to pick one, it would honestly have to be the Tab S. Basically, Samsung is the king of display technology. They kind of own the industry, and this is really a tentpole product for them to display what they can actually do. And with that high resolution of 2560 by 1600 and that organic LED technology, you can pretty much get the best of both worlds in both color experience and overall brightness and the overall clarity and density of the pixels. In terms of black levels, it has one of the best black levels in a tablet available right now, pretty much infinite dynamic contrast ratio. Additionally, the screen can also adapt to your different lighting condition environment, so you can even tone down the contrast and overall saturation to make things look a little bit more realistic and less hyper kind of surreal. So definitely some great features there, and certainly in terms of display, I have to say that the Tab S wins here. Now, moving forward, in terms of the internal specifications, they're all using completely different architectures. The Surface 3 is using Intel's 4th generation desktop and laptop processors. It's using actually the Core i5, which is a dual-core processor clocked at about 1.9 gigahertz. It can also turbo up to 2.5 gigahertz. It has 4 gigabytes of DDR3. It's also expandable to 8 gigabytes. And one important thing to mention is that you can buy different options to upgrade the internal specifications of the Microsoft Surface 3. And in that sense, it's certainly more in lines of a desktop or laptop computer where you can modify the internal hardware to suit your needs. Now, the iPad Air 2 is using the brand new A8X, which is funny enough a triple core, the first triple core processor that Apple has put into any of their iDevices. It's a processor that's clocked in about 1.5 gigahertz and it has 2 gigs of RAM, making this the most powerful iOS platform ever made. It also has the M8 Motion coprocessor, and if we take a look at the Tab S, it's using an Exynos 8-core processor, which is comprised of 2 quad cores, one clocked at about 1.9 gigahertz, the other one clocked at about 1.3 gigahertz, and it has 3 gigs of RAM. So very similar RAM and multitasking performance of what you would find on the Microsoft Surface 3, although the Surface 3 is a much more heavy-duty product, so in terms of doing more demanding tasks, you definitely want to go for that over the Samsung. But that being said, of course, all three of these are very, very capable, and to demonstrate that, we're going to take a look at some benchmarks and see how they all perform against each other. Now, the first thing that we're going to take a look at is Geekbench 3, and we can actually run Geekbench 3 on each platform. So looking at the results itself, you can see that the new iPad Air has some pretty outstanding performance. That new A8X chip is getting about 1800 on the single core score and about 4400 on the multi-core score. That's a little bit higher than what the Surface Pro 3 got, and certainly quite a bit higher on what the Samsung got. Now, just to test out the GPUs in all three of these tablets, we're going to run the Ice Storm benchmark from 3D Mark and basically see how the GPUs perform against each other. And looking at the results, you can see that all three tablets maxed out the 720p benchmark, and the Surface Pro 3 and the Air 2 are pretty much tied in terms of overall FPS in both the first and second test, but the Surface Pro 3 did do a little bit better in terms of the physics test. It got about 59.95 frames per second versus 32 frames per second. And the Samsung Tab S, although it might not be as high as performing in terms of graphical capabilities as the Air, but it certainly puts up a decent effort. Now, lastly, we're going to just do a quick boot up test. So we're going to turn on all three devices roughly at the same time and see which one boots up the fastest. And looking at the results, you definitely saw that the Surface Pro 3 booted into the OS the fastest. You do have to log in the Surface Pro 3, but the iPad and the Tab S are certainly not far behind. Now let's talk about some of the unique ports and kind of features on each of these tablets. The Surface 3 has a full USB 3.0 connection, a micro SD card expansion slot, so you can upgrade the internal memory up to 128 gigabytes. And it also has a mini DisplayPort connection, enabling you to connect an external monitor for extending your monitor or maybe duplicating and doing a whole bunch of different things, making it more in lines of a laptop and desktop computer. And again, another staple of the Surface design is that it has that kickstand, which you can adjust to get better kind of viewing angles and positioning, and it pairs well with the optional keyboard that you can get with it. Now, there's not a lot of unique things about the iPad Air 2 in terms of the overall kind of ports you can get. There's not too much. Basically, you have the Lightning connector, which you can get a whole bunch of different accessories for. Obviously, iOS is limited in terms of what you can do with those accessories, but you certainly have a couple of options there. But the big addition over here is that they have the Touch ID system that you've seen previously in their iPhone lineups, and it works really well. It's one of the most versatile Touch ID systems in the marketplace right now, and making it very comparable to the fingerprint scanner that's in the Tab S. Now, the Tab S also, again, has a fingerprint scanner on the home button. It's more of a swipe orientation scanner, which, again, does the job, but it's not as tightly integrated and as nice to use as the Touch ID system in the iPad Air. Now, furthermore, in terms of memory, you can obviously get different sizes for each model. The iPad Air 2 comes in three different models, the 16, 64, and 128 gigabyte versions, and basically there is no internal expandable memory, so you're kind of stuck with which model you get in terms of memory. Now, the Surface 3 has a couple of different options in terms of internal memory configurations. It ranges anywhere from 64 gigabytes all the way up to 512 gigabytes with a full-on quad-core Core i7 processor, which is a $2,000 tablet. Now, again, the cool thing about the Surface 3 and the Tab S is they both have expansion slots for memory, so you can upgrade the memory via their micro SD expansion slot up to 128 gigabytes. Now, next what we're going to do is just a speaker comparison test. So we're going to play the same song over in each tablet, and that way you have a good idea in terms of which one sounds the best. Now, in terms of the operating system, all three of these, as we mentioned before, run a completely different operating system. We have Windows 8.1 on the Surface 3. We have Android 4.4 on the Tab S. And obviously, we have the new iOS 8 on the Air 2. Now, all three of these are excellent OSs. They're fully featured, fully rich. In terms of, obviously, full balls-to-the-walls capabilities, certainly the Surface 3 is the most capable because it is running a desktop operating system. And it's really nicely integrated into the whole touch architecture of the Surface 3. I think Microsoft is doing an excellent job in harmonizing between what they do in Windows and what they do in their Surface line of products. And certainly the new Windows 10 is going to be an excellent OS for this tablet in the future. Now, iOS 8 on the Air 2 is certainly has some couple of unique features. I really like how you can do the continuity and handoff features where you can go from one iOS device to the other, or even to your Mac to your iOS device, or vice versa, and work on the stuff that you were doing on either of those machines, making that whole Apple ecosystem as synergistic as possible. Now, the Tab S is using TouchWiz, which is running on top of Android 4.4, and TouchWiz is definitely not a bad skin. It's certainly not the best skin available on Android right now. It certainly has a lot of features that Samsung kind of crams in there, and for first-time users, again, there's a bit of a learning curve. The iPad Air is certainly the most user-friendly, and the Surface Pro 3 and Tab S certainly have a learning curve, but they have a lot of excellent, great capabilities. One thing I really like about the Tab S is that it has a multi-window multitasking mode, so you could be doing a whole bunch of different things within one whole screen, and that's certainly something iOS is missing, and certainly what this iPad should have had, but we still don't have that feature. So in terms of capabilities, the laundry list list of features is still growing on the Samsung line of products compared to what you would find on the iPad Air 2. Now, in terms of connectivity, all of these devices have the latest generation of Wi-Fi technology, AC, dual bandwidth capabilities, as well as Bluetooth 4.0. Now, moving forward, one of the most important features about any kind of smart device these days has to be the cameras, and these three are certainly no exception. Now, in terms of the front-facing camera, you'll notice on the iPad Air 2, you have the lowest megapixel, 1.2 megapixel on the front-facing FaceTime camera versus 5 megapixels on the Surface 3 and 2.1 megapixels. Now, in terms of quality, obviously the front-facing camera on the Surface 3 is made for video conferencing and things like that, so you definitely do get a little bit of quality and better color rendition on that front-facing camera, but it's a different story when we turn over. Here we get to kind of see the iPad Air and the Samsung kind of competing against each other, much in the same vein as they do in the smartphone realm. You have 8 megapixel rear-facing camera on the iPad Air 2, and it has 1080p of full video HD recording capabilities, as well as 120 frames per second slow motion mode and 720p, which is a unique feature that is not available in a lot of tablets right now, and certainly an exclusive feature for the Air 2. Now, the Samsung Tab S has an excellent 8 megapixel camera that falls very in line of what the 8 megapixel camera can do in the iPad Air 2. It also has 30 frames per second, but unfortunately no slow motion video capabilities. Now, what we're going to do over here is just do a side-by-side comparison between all three of these tablets in terms of the rear-facing cameras, and that way you guys can decide what looks best to you. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about is probably the third most important thing about any tablet and any, again, a mobile device, and that has to be with battery life. Now, luckily, all three of these tablets deliver some excellent battery performance. Now, the Surface 3 is certainly the most power hungry. It's running pretty intense hardware inside, so it's no surprise that it's getting a little bit under of what the other two can do. It's getting a solid 9 hours in terms of web browsing and just general usage. I'm sure if you turn off your Wi-Fi and are just doing simple word processing and things like that, you're going to get plenty of battery life that can go head to head to the best performing laptops that are out there and available right now. Now, the iPad Air 2 is certainly excellent in terms of battery life. It's been consistent at 10 hours of web browsing, and again, battery life always fluctuates, but it's definitely an impressive piece of hardware because being so thin at only just around 6 millimeters, it's incredible that it can still maintain a pretty heavy duty battery life of 10 hours. Now, the Tab S is probably the best in terms of performing. It has probably the largest battery. It has 7,800 milliamp hour battery, easily getting 11 to 12 hours of web browsing. And again, if you're using Samsung's battery saving modes, you'll probably get even better. So very impressive battery performance out of the Samsung Tab S, and certainly rises to the top in this category. Now, just to conclude everything, I'm going to talk about pricing over here, because one thing to certainly consider is that the Microsoft Surface 3 is certainly designed to be a laptop replacement device. So it starts at $799 for the baseline configuration that we have over here, which is the Core i5 with the 64 gigabytes of internal memory. Now, the iPad Air 2 starts at $499 for the 16 gigabyte versions. Obviously, you can configure it quite high as well if you want the 4G version, and the Samsung Tab S, again, you can configure to your liking, but they both start around $500. So So they're pretty equal in terms of that regard. Now, picking which one is right for you is obviously a task that you have to consider. Basically, review all the stuff we talked about in this video, take a look at the pros and cons of each device, and go out in the store and kind of try each one out to see which one best fits your needs. But hopefully I gave you some kind of insight and some kind of direction where you can go and determine, again, which one is right for you. But on that, guys, that's really it. If you have any specific questions about anything I talked about in this video, please make sure to leave that on a comment down below. Make sure to give us a thumbs up if you like the video. That really helps us out tremendously. And let me know what you guys think about each of these tablets. Do you think they're kind of comparable? They're all really different and unique in their own respect. So I definitely would love to hear your thoughts and opinions. But thank you so much for watching. We'll see you later. Take care.